So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim to understand.
Atheist and agnostic as well as many.
Hello again, friend
Hello.
Preston.
Man, today's gonna be good.
I feel like a prophecy is being fulfilled. Or at least an appointment on my calendar.
For sure. Welcome, everybody, to the Holy Watermelon Podcast. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about prophecy today. And I was thinking about Nostradamus. He's, thanks to History Channel, he's kind of the big prophet that's not really tied to any specific religion as far as popular culture presents really well.
Right, he's just kind of this guy who predicts things.
Yeah, I mean, he was a Christian. His family was actually Jewish, only a couple of generations before him. He lived about 500 years ago. 1500s was his time. And super popular guy. He wrote a book called The Prophecies. You know his name isn't Nostradamus?
I saw that in our research and in researching this episode.
Yeah. Michel de Nostradam.
That makes
Basically, Michael of Our Lady. Which is, Nostradamus sounds
sense. Way more badass.
fancier.
Also a little bit like a hippopotamus.
A little bit. But his hugely popular book, The Prophecies, none of it is originally his. We like to give Nostradamus credit as a culture for being this great prophet who saw all these things coming. None of the prophecies in his book were originally his. He repeated a bunch from the Bible. He straight up plagiarized from several other sources. And he also actively denied being a prophet.
Aren't they so vague that it could apply to anything?
Many of them are vague that, they could apply to anything. And we also have a problem with people who want to say Nostradamus was a prophet, translating his works from Old French to common today English and deliberately mistranslating them so that they'll line up better with specific events.
With what happened.
Yeah.
Oh.
But Nostradamus, not a prophet, not even a little bit, just a skilled writer. He wrote almanacs and things like that. And then he's just like, and here's a bunch of prophecies that are known to people who read Latin, but my French audience doesn't read Latin, so they're going to like this book.
So then if Nostradamus wasn't a prophet, what is a prophet, Preston?
A prophet is, broadly speaking, if you want to generalize it across multiple religious traditions, a prophet is a person who serves as a mouthpiece for a divinity or supernatural force. An oracle is a pretty fair word that's basically the same thing, a mouthpiece for a god. So that's fairly distinct from, say, a seer or an augur who is able to read
Things.
or
There's lots of things.
omens. Like sometimes you'll have an augur who reads entrails or tea leaves or just... I don't think an augur is a fair title for one who reads the stars. That's more of a seer, non-augur. We've got a whole bunch of people who have found up a whole lot of different ways that they can read things in the universe.
Medium, psychics, not that that's not this episode, but you're right. There's a lot of titles for people who see things that have yet to happen.
Right, and they can do it with a sort of reliability that's just enough to get people to buy into it.
Mm-hmm. In my research, so there's prophets and prophecy, and then there's prophesizing, which is a little more, you don't need to be a prophet to prophesize, in my understanding. Is that as in God is speaking to you and telling you what to do with you within your personal relationship with God. This is very much like a Christian fundamentalist term.
So I like to distinguish big P and little p prophets.
Okay.
Like
Big P and little p.
If you are prophesying, then that makes you a prophet, little p. If you have any official office or title as prophet, that would be the big P prophet. And so prophets can be seen, whether that's their title or not, in every religious tradition and culture on this planet throughout history.
Absolutely.
Which is actually kind of nifty that we are able to see these parallels around the world without any worry about cultural lines.
I mean, it makes sense in a way that, how else does a religion start? Unless God is talking, unless there's a supernatural power talking to someone, then you just have atheists. Right? If there's not, whether that's God speaks to everyone or God speaks through one or two people, there needs to be some connection. Someone has to believe God's speaking to them or it wouldn't happen, right?
That's a reasonably popular model for religious development.
I guess you get the odd ones, but we'll talk about Buddhist prophets as well, where I guess you're working to obtain a level of enlightenment, and there isn't, I guess, depends on the model of Buddhism you look at. I was going to say, but there isn't a God in Buddhism, but depending on which one you follow, then Buddha is.
Well, and it all depends on how you define God. Because we've had this argument before, too.
Go back to our previous episodes.
Yeah. So there are some religious traditions that aren't started off by somebody claiming prophecy. If you were describing the idea of a God in the sky, you don't have to speak to him to say to your kids, there's somebody up there who's giving us the lightning and the rain.
Fair.
But at some point, somebody will claim to communicate with that God.
I think so, because it comes down to the how do you know it's up there?
Exactly.
And I don't want to say it's easy to say, but it's a pretty good default to go to, well, God told me, or God told this person, or whatever.
Yeah. Oracles and prophets tend to speak as though they are the mouth of God, or the God that they serve. For example, the oracles of Apollo way back in ancient Greece would speak as though their words had come originally from Apollo, and they would quote him and speak as though they were him. So it's pretty standard for the way we look at prophets in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament as well.
All right, so we have a whole bunch of notes on prophecy. Do we want to break down by religion first? What do you think? Or some of my just mullings?
Let's go through your mullings. Let's see, what are your thoughts here?
Oh, okay.
As an atheist.
Well, let's start. I'm going to scroll down on the notes a bit. I titled this section Prophets in the Wild. And I'm sure everyone, if you live in a major city and have ever taken public transport, you've come across one of these people who claims that God is speaking to them. And I distinctly remember one day going to university, this man on the bus was saying that he had seen the start of time and the end of time and knew how it was all going to end, and that God was speaking to him. And everyone, like all the ladies, were clutching their bags a little closer or putting them on the seat so he wouldn't sit next to them. And in my notes, I say, but if he was in a suit at a pulpit on a Sunday morning, people would be like, oh my God, right? So this line between mental illness and being a prophet, and we're going to do an exorcism episode around Halloween, but same thing, right? The difference between, are they possessed by the devil, or are they mentally ill? Are you a prophet, or are you mentally ill? And is that like basically based on what you wear and what your job title is, or?
So anytime the audience doesn't want to hear what they're hearing, absolutely, it's going to be easy to write it off as this person's probably mentally ill. And apart from that, any prophecy can only be judged on whether or not it comes true. And I guess a roundabout angle at that would be, you can also judge a prophecy based on how detailed it is. And like, if it's deliberately going to be obvious that it's self-fulfilling, or deliberately so vague that it's going to happen no matter what at some point, and you can tell from in advance, then that's not terribly impressive.
But see, and maybe obviously as outsiders, it's easier, but we see all these doomsday predictions that have yet to come true. And
Right.
so often the followers still believe the person is a prophet and that they're correct. There was a miscalculation.
Yeah. I mean, people appreciate when somebody admits that they were wrong and they can say, oh, no, I miscalculated. This is a thing. That, I mean, it's weak, but I get why people who really want to believe and choose to believe can accept that as something to not undermine their belief. But I don't love it, you know?
Well, yeah, and there's some I can't think of any off the top of my head because I'm just literally having these thoughts now as we're recording. Some of these doomsday cults have like it's multiple times. Like it's like okay, once, fine, but there's people who have been predicting the end of the world for decades, and their followers are still like, "Yep, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, shame on you." Like it's just they
It's
just
never
started,
once shame on me.
Yeah, it's like oh,
for
okay,
believing.
we'll just.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Usually, when somebody gives out a whole bunch of different predictions, it's more of a, hey, I'm studying the scripture and these clues are here and this is here. It's all written down. Why can't you see it? They don't usually do the whole prophet thing. It's more of a, I'm smarter than you, which is obviously annoying. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but none are coming to mind right now.
Okay.
But we've definitely got loads of people running around saying, hey, the end of the world is nigh because God told me. And hasn't happened yet.
No, I think there was one recently that came and went that some cult somewhere was preparing for.
Yeah, I remember in 2011.
That was the big one, right?
There was, well, it wasn't the big one, but there was a reasonably popular fella who decided there's this time in May in 2011 where the world's going to end. And that didn't happen. And then he's like, oh, no, sorry, I was wrong. It's going to be in October.
Oh, I do remember that
October
one.
came and went, and here we are
What
still.
what's the one I'm thinking of? That was like in December, the Mayan calendar.
Oh, yeah, the Mayan calendar that got a lot of people all stressed out. I looked into it, and there's not like any solid prophecy that, yeah, the world's going to end. It's just the calendar did end, and a lot of people are like, well, a calendar this long having an end point means the end of the world. Weak sauce.
So I don't even remember. What was it, like December 21st, 2008 or something? That's the number in my brain. I don't remember the end of the Mayan calendar, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure Mayan calendar was 2012.
Was it 2012?
Pretty sure.
I don't remember the date. Anyway, someone will correct us. But I remember on that day that all of a sudden there was like this really weird noise in my neighborhood. It was like this whooshing noise. It was like, and it was super loud. And like I was still in high school. Like I was still living at home and most of my friends were still living at home with their parents, I say. And so like everyone could hear it like for blocks. And I was like, what is happening? And there is a utility station across from the car wash.
Mm-hmm.
You know where I'm talking about?
I got a pretty good idea, yeah.
Car wash in the junior high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it had like over pressurized. So it was like releasing pressure. And the immediate neighborhood had to be evacuated. And we could hear it all the way. Like my parents are by the Save-On. I'm like I'm trying to explain to Preston where this is without doxing us. And my parents were by the Save-On and we could hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And like, again, all my friends were like, what is, and we all thought it was the end of the world, obviously, because we're like, what is this noise? And we've lived there for decades and never heard it before and never heard it since.
Right.
So anyway,
That's crazy.
that's just
I like it.
flavor. I will say as an atheist who, clearly I don't believe anyone is a prophet. I actually really appreciate the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints approach to prophecy. And I forget where I read it somewhere, but basically they have prophets to this day. The leader of the church is a prophet, speaks to God, got a phone line to God, I presume, in his office. And their perspective on it, and jump in if I'm wrong, but you didn't correct my notes, so I assume I'm doing okay, is that if God spoke to us 2,000 years ago, we should still have the ability to speak to him now. He wasn't all of a sudden like, peace out.
Bye, guys.
I'm not speaking to humans anymore. I've spent all this time putting you together and bye. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, if you believe that all these Old Testament and New Testament prophets existed and they received revelation from God, then yeah, logic would follow that we could still receive prophecy and revelation from God. But there's definitely Christian groups that don't think that.
Yeah, Christianity, broadly speaking, has a weird relationship with the idea of prophecy. An awful lot of Christians reject the idea that there's any way to hear from God outside of reading the Bible, which of course is flawed in that you've limited this person that you view to be all-powerful to the words that have been written down and edited centuries ago in a book that isn't even complete anyway.
And I mean, it's still getting rewritten, right? There's still new versions popping up. So
yeah, I wouldn't say rewritten's the best word, but I mean, it does go through an editorial process.
My Bible that we were talking about in our bonus episode was rewritten.
Okay. And it does go through an editorial process before publication every single time. Yeah. So yeah, a little bit rewritten. And so, for example, you've got the Pentecostals are also pretty big fans of prophecy because prophecy is promised in the New Testament. Paul talks about how as long as there are believers, there will be prophecy among them. And so Protestants and other super charismatic Christian churches are definitely big into that idea that you can receive revelation, direct communication with God. And then some of the older traditions that are still with us from Christianity tend to be a little bit more, you know, the guy in charge, like the Pope, for example, can receive some revelation to guide the church, but there isn't big revelations of old hidden things or hidden things to come so much anymore. Which I think is actually really interesting. There was about 500 years ago in the Catholic Church, there was the prophecy of the popes. It was only about 400 years ago, sorry. It was first published in 1595 by a Benedictine monk named Arnold Wion. He attributed this prophecy to Saint Malachi, 12th century archbishop, and it lists the last 112 popes. It says these are the last 112. There's not gonna be more after this. So the end of the 16th century, this is kind of a big deal. People start counting down to the end of the popes. And it's kind of interesting. And remember, this is meant to have been written 400 years before it was published. But it's kind of interesting. It starts with Celestine II, and it is completely accurate and describes correctly all of the popes up until just before it was published.
Oh,
and then it
handy.
stops being accurate.
Weird.
Which means that it's very, very likely
that it wasn't written 400 years before.
Right. It's super suspicious.
Weird.
What's interesting, though, is that 111 was Benedict XVI. And then before it goes on to 112, there's this weird little paragraph, just short little note, and then it goes on to Peter the Roman. And so because Pope Francis isn't Peter the Roman, as far as we can tell, based on his name or where he's from.
I was going to say he's not even a little bit Roman, but yeah.
There's a lot of people that like to argue that in this list that's called the last 112 popes, there's space for who knows how many between 111 and the last.
112.
And it's because people are desperate that this list is actually authentic prophecy. But, I mean, there's loads of evidence that it's what counts as a forgery being a product of when it was published and not 400 years earlier.
Wow, it's so accurate. Wow.
Yeah. At the time it was published, people should have recognized, hey, yeah, it's super precise and accurate up to this point, and then is vague and cryptic leading forward when it was supposed to be written 400 years before. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah, it
But
sounds kind of weird.
it's like the prophecy that people within the Catholic world think about as far as recent-ish prophecies.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's definitely a forgery. It's not authentic revelation.
Maybe that's a good segue. How do you know when something's authentic revelation?
In the moment, it's almost impossible unless theoretically there's something in your gut that says, yes, this is right. And even then, I mean, we've talked about the tricky nature of belief and knowledge. How do you even know that that feeling in your gut means anything? You have to wait and see when that prophecy is fulfilled to know that it was a proper prophecy and judge it based on its merit as a self-fulfilling prophecy or a guaranteed eventuality.
I really want to sing a line from Book of Mormon.
Go for it.
In 1978, God changed his mind about black people. Black people!
Yeah. What a great musical.
Right?
And
What a great prophecy.
the one thing that I love about the humor of that show is that it's honest about the two teachers, the missionaries. They were inept from the beginning and didn't know anything. And so their presentation of what the church does believe is what it is presented to be and not necessarily a matter of historic fact. But it was an enjoyable show anyway.
Yeah.
So prophecy is all over the place. I really like the way we see prophets presented in the Hebrew Bible, which is, of course, the familiar zone that we deal with in the West. And so they were usually men who served as permanent fixtures in royal courts, though there were a few that were not. And this is basically paralleled around the world. Every culture that has a king or an emperor or a chieftain had somebody in his close circle that was basically responsible for reading omens and double checking the decisions of the chieftain or emperor or king or whatever to make sure that it wasn't going to end in a catastrophic failure that would end the nation. And sometimes that meant reading entrails, and sometimes it meant just popping off into the corner and praying and seeing what happens, and anywhere in between, depending on the culture and the traditional practices of that group. But what they all had in common is that they proclaimed a message to the people. Typically in the Hebrew setting, that message was, if you guys don't stop doing these stupid things, you will be destroyed.
Yep.
And Israel has a long history of suffering some wicked destructions.
Yeah.
There were a few of the old Hebrew prophets that talked explicitly about a man who would come to preserve the people in some way or another. And if you're a Christian, especially fundamental Christians, you believe that everything of these prophecies refers to the coming of Christ.
Yes, in the documentary I watched, American Gospel, that I put on our Discord, it's a wild ride. That's what the one group was talking about, is that everything in the Bible, in the Old Testament, points to Jesus Christ. And if you can't see that, you're not a real Christian. He was like, every story in the Old Testament points to the coming of Jesus. I was like, does it?
The story of Lot and his
I was going to
daughters?
say, does that point to the coming of Jesus?
It does not. Not even a little bit.
I didn't think so, but
However, to the credit that may or may not be due to the person who said that, the story might point to the need for a savior with some efficacy.
okay. I mean,
But-
yeah,
I mean,
Lot needs an intervention. Lot needs an adult. Yeah.
yeah, it's tricky, but I mean, if you genuinely believe that everything in the Bible points to Jesus, you'll find a way to connect it, even if it's as simple as here's some people that need Jesus. You'll figure it
Y'all
out.
need Jesus in your lives.
So yeah, it's not unfair, but I don't like to make that generalization. The story of Jonah and the whale. If it was written more recently, the story would have started once upon a time. The story of Jonah and the whale is fiction.
Absolutely.
It was never meant to be read as a historical story about a real prophet. Everything about the story is like obviously counterintuitive to anybody's experience in Israel, where if you pay attention to the story, everybody's righteous and does what God says when they hear the message, except for the guy who's supposed to be spreading that message. Jonah hears, hey, you need to go visit these people. And he says, hell no, I'm going the other way. The people in the boat, they're like, hey, God has a message for us and you are a problem to us. We're going to do what's right and get you out of this boat so that you can go and do your job. And then Jonah finally gets to the city and they repent. The city being Nineveh in Babylon, which everybody in Israel is like, no, those people are evil. And in the story, it's like, oh yeah, no, we're good now. It's like obviously a fiction.
What?
But, you know.
We need to do an episode on biblical literalism. It was
Yeah, I think you're right.
it was requested too, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll chat after.
The prophets are interesting. You've got prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. These were courtly prophets. They served the king to let him know what he needed to do in any situation where he would ask. And so that's pretty standard around the world, like I said before.
We should move on to the New Testament.
Yeah. So Jesus is kind of the central figure of the New Testament, even though he's only actually present for one narrative told 4 different times. And he's a lot more than a prophet in Christianity, but he does do some prophesying. And most of it pretty vague. He does specifically promise that the temple will be destroyed soon. And while he's also talking about his own body that's about to be destroyed, the temple in Jerusalem is seen as another fulfillment of that prophecy because it was destroyed about 40 years later. Mm-hmm. Or 30 years later. Now the timeline's going fuzzy on me, but that's okay.
Shortly after Jesus was crucified.
Yeah, generation and a half, 2 generations later.
Which in a grand scheme of the 2,000-year-old religion, it's not that much.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've also got Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist. An angel appears to him, and broadly speaking, this fits into prophecy if you are able to speak with divine beings, including angels.
So would Mary have been a prophet, or because she was the lady, she wasn't allowed to be?
Mary has a very special position in some parts of Christianity.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail your Zechariah talk.
Yeah.
We can get back to Mary. Sorry.
Well, and they're not wildly different in their experiences. And I mean, even Joseph, her husband, had an angel appear to him and say, hey, this is what's up. Mary's experience is a little bit more intense.
Yeah. She got divine spunked.
I mean, I don't know the exact operation of how things happened, but she became pregnant in a way that, as far as I know, there's one way people get pregnant.
Not Mary.
But turns out abstinence is not 100% effective.
I just think she had the best lie of all human history. No, I'm a virgin. An angel knocked me up.
Yeah, that's more or less the story.
I swear.
Well,
I'm making shifty eyes just so
Yeah.
people who are listening.
And Joseph's family did not like it one bit.
No,
Otherwise,
they
it would
were
have
on
been,
her.
right? It would have been a lot easier for them to find a place to sleep when it went time to deal with the census and have a place to stay during Passover with family, as one usually does.
Well, we'll get to the nativity in a different episode, but
Yeah.
back to New Testament prophet.
Paul is visited by Jesus on the road to Damascus. This counts as prophecy. It's one of the more... So prophecy, depending on who you read and how you define things, you've got all kinds of levels of awesomeness of prophecy. And hearing a voice, kind of minor. Seeing a person and hearing their voice and being able to touch them, opposite end, best possible kind of prophecy level. And Paul, who hated Christians because they were just the worst kind of... Why is the word blanking on me?
Heretics.
Heretics. Christians were the worst kind of heretics. And then he pulls a 180 and realizes, oh, I shouldn't be killing these heretic Christians because Jesus is real and is the Son of God and is mighty and divine. So changes his life around because of this revelation that he has. And then you've got John the Revelator, which is, he is a prophet. He sees and reveals and serves as an oracle for the divine. And he and Paul warn of false prophets of a couple of different varieties. You've got prophets who do testify of Christ for their own personal profit, with an F, for their own financial gain.
Okay.
That kind of prophet. But you've also got false prophets who deny Christ while also performing miracles. And that's also a problem for Christians.
Yeah. We are going to do an entire episode. Our next episode is on the Revelation. And it's a pretty big deal because there's entire denominations of Christianity that just love that one book.
Which I think is interesting that we'll get into a little bit more. The Revelation of John was widely considered as questionably authentic for a long time among Christians.
So I listened to it while I was working.
Yeah.
And I'll probably listen to it again. But considering I've seen that shitty 70s movie that I showed you. A Thief in the Night.
Name.
A Thief in the Night. And then there's the Left Behind series. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting, and obviously they talk about the beast, but I'm this isn't nearly as scary as these books and movies make it out to be. I'm oh, that was 2 hours of content. I just thought it would be a lot more spooky, and it wasn't.
Right.
Anyway, but we'll talk all about that on our next episode. I don't want to give too much away. Anyway,
what else we got?
We can move on to Islam because theirs is an incredibly prophet-based religion.
Yes.
And that's the next chronologically. And then we'll talk about Eastern religions that
I love
have prophecy.
The noise you make for your quotation fingers.
That's my air quotes noise.
So yeah, in Islam, prophecy is hugely important. Muhammad is the final prophet for most Muslims. There are some Muslim denominations that accept more prophets after him, but that's not typical. But he's meant to be the last in the long chain. And they also do respect Jesus as a prophet. not as the Son of God, but as a prophet.
Yeah, and there's even stories of Jesus in the Quran.
Absolutely.
So,
There's even a book in the Quran dedicated to Mary as well.
oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But that's a big misconception, is that somehow Muslims hate Christians and Christianity don't believe in Jesus. They absolutely do.
Right.
And have stories about him that aren't in the Bible.
I'm reminded of an interview I watched with Reza Aslan. He wrote a book, a great scholarly book on Jesus.
Oh, it's on my list to read.
Yeah. And he got dragged around so hard in all these interviews with all kinds of people because he's Muslim writing about Jesus. And all these people who are either Christian or pseudo-Christian be like, why are you writing about Jesus if you're not a Christian?
A lot of the interviews I saw were like, how can you write about Jesus as a Christian? He's like, because I am a scholar.
Right?
Like, I can do this objectively and look at the research.
Mm-hmm.
And even as a Muslim, he believes Jesus existed and was a prophet. It was, if you want to go roll your eyes out of your head, watch some of those interviews, because they're like, how can you do this as a Muslim? And he's like, because I'm a fucking scholar.
Right?
Like, that's like being like, how can you be a nutritionist and be a vegan? It's like you can still understand the nutritional value of meat, even if you choose not to eat it.
Yeah. Because I have teeth and a stomach, thanks.
Yeah. And I have a brain that I can read about the nutritional value of meat. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if that was the best analogy, but yeah, it's like, because the information's out there. Mm-hmm. And honestly, at this point, 2,000 years later, it's all just conjecture. Right? So all the information we have about Jesus is out there in the world.
Yep.
If you want to go and condense that and maybe come up with some new theories, anyone can fucking do it. Doesn't matter what your religion is.
Yep.
Okay. I'm just going to wow, Preston, you shouldn't have brought that up. I'm going to get off my little soapbox. Step.
I like it.
I feel like you had another point to make that I just like steamrolled.
Yeah. So,
so
back to Islam. So the Quran is revelations received by Muhammad. So he is meant to have received all these revelations primarily through speaking with Jibril, or the angel Gabriel. And prophecy is kind of the staple that holds the religion together, just like it is with Islam, with Israel, the Judaism. With Christianity, we rely on the appearance of Jesus to people. Peter receiving revelation for the church, Paul, John, so on. And then we've also got the non-Western, non-Abrahamic faiths that are
That's
also
a better term.
finding revelation valuable. Zoroastrianism, which a lot of people like to point to as kind of the big changing influence on Israel while they were in exile that made their religion what it is today, found prophets to be important, particularly Zarathustra, who, of course, is one of those fellas who likes to go into trances, which is not terribly uncommon for prophets around the world, especially those who like to use psychotropic assistance.
Yep. Woo.
And I mean, I don't have any personal experience with psychotropic substances, but from what I've heard, that's a great way to become more empathetic with the world at large, I guess, and to feel closer to God, I guess, is the way it's described by an awful lot of people. Mm-hmm. Whatever their definition of God is, that it seems to work. What else have we got on our list? I know you did some research too.
Well, I was just going to add that Zarathustra, so he's the founder of Zoroastrianism. He wrote the sacred writings of Zoroastrianism, the Avesta, is a revelation from him. So inspired writings, just like Buddhism from the Buddha. Which there's our segue.
I like it. So Buddha is an interesting example so we have an awful lot of these people who are either like okay families or noble families who go and serve in the king's court as prophets. And occasionally you'll have real humble folks who come up to bring messages to the king's court. And Siddhartha Gautama does kind of the opposite. He grew up in a royal court and then said, peace, bye.
Peace be with you. Kidding, the episode's not over.
He left the royal courts to go and experience life and recognize the depth of the things that he'd only seen surface level after escaping for one night, and became a prophet almost in exile. I don't think that's a perfectly fair label on there, but I'm going to use it anyway.
Okay. I like it.
I think it's novel that he is different in that way.
I think it's great. Good old Siddhartha.
Right. And we talked a little bit about one of his cool prophecies back when we were talking about this
Chubby
subject.
Buddha.
The chubby Buddha. The Maitreya Buddha. And if you're comfortable with wild mispronunciations of names, the Buddy Buddha. The Buddhai.
Buddha.
The chubby laughing Buddha.
So that is his reincarnation that is supposed to happen sometime.
We don't know when. It's supposed to be after the world forgets Buddhism, which, I mean, it's meant to be like if the whole world forgets the correct Buddhism or Buddhism altogether, one or the other, then Maitreya Buddha will come and restore it.
And be like, don't
Proper
forget
Buddhism.
me. Ho, 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 ho.
Yeah.
Green giant. I didn't find any revelation in Hinduism, but I didn't do a ton of digging.
So Hinduism, you've got the Vedas, and we don't have a lot of solid information
old.
about where the Vedas really came from, who specifically wrote them or anything like that.
No, they come from the gods, from...
But like even the way that we
Before I had
have
one.
the Vedas, I mean, we have them through the people of India.
Oh,
who
yeah, absolutely.
received them from the invading
Somewhere, yeah.
Aryans, who probably did originate the Vedic religion, but we don't have a lot of information there.
No, we just, we're just told it came from Brahmins' mouths.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in day-to-day Hinduism, there isn't a lot of... In mainstream Hinduism, there isn't a lot of prophetic figures publicly, but there are plenty of groups that have shown up where a person shows up and
you get some-
uses his charisma and
Some
claims
gurus
prophecy.
that are pretty, charismatic, I guess is the best way. Though even then, the gurus I can think of that have started, we talked about Bhagwan in our cults episode, which is a Hindu cult. He didn't talk about prophecy. He was just sort of, again, this charismatic leader that people liked the way he presented his branch of Hinduism. But I don't think he had any prophecy specifically, just a very communal lifestyle.
He presented a way to live that worked out really nicely.
But I don't think he had any prophecy that people
Right.
thought it was new and exciting. It was just how he presented.
The argument was the tricky thing is defining the difference between inspiration and revelation. Loads would argue that he was inspired to start all this up, but I guess that depends on how you define inspired. But yeah, it didn't claim revelation. Kind of nifty
Divinely
stuff.
inspired. We skipped over it. The point I started laughing at. Do we want to talk about?
What? Yeah.
Kind of
Ask
go
your
back
question.
to we're kind of jumping back, but modern prophecy. I made a note of what does it mean to be filled with the Spirit. We see this a lot, obviously being a Western Christian country, being filled with the Holy Spirit. And this is kind of, like Preston said, the Pentecostal, having a close personal relationship with God, where God speaks to you constantly. Maybe we don't see it as you being a prophet, but God is speaking to you. So that was my question. What does it mean to be filled with the Holy Spirit?
So just as Christianity is wickedly diverse.
It's a spectrum.
There's an awful lot of different thoughts on what that means. For some people, can you even say that you're not filled with the Spirit if you're not rolling on the ground, just kind of wigging out?
I mean,
say it. There's an awful lot of people that look like dementia patients when they're trying to show off that they've got the Spirit in them. And some people look like they're suffering from epilepsy. And other people are a lot more dignified in their behavior, I guess.
I mean, you see people sobbing.
Yeah.
Again, if you're Pentecostal, you speak in tongues. And then some people just like feel the Spirit. Some
people just feel comfort and feel reassurance of truth. And you wanting to hold my hand, is that what that is?
Yeah. Do you feel the Spirit in this room?
I feel love. And for a lot of people, that's how they recognize that the Spirit is there.
Okay.
Because we've been friends for a while. I feel love when I'm here.
Aw. And I just made him hold my hand. So.
That didn't hurt.
Oh, good. Yeah, atheists don't burn.
Right?
Yeah, just so everyone knows if you're...
So what it means to feel or to be filled with the Spirit seems to vary a lot from person to person. But it seems to me that it's a lot more useful if it's reassuring ideas and divine truths than if it's causing you to roll around in a way that might cause you an injury or or cause somebody to think less of you or your dignity. Maybe.
Interesting. We'll have to talk about glossalia or something. I forget what the technical term for speaking in tongues is. There's a real... Okay, I'm Googling it.
Okay, I don't know. Religiously, we just call it speaking in tongues, but...
No, there's a name for it.
Not in my circles where I wander around, but I believe you.
Glossolalia. The phenomenon of speaking in an unknown language, especially in religious worship. Glossolalia.
Okay.
That's your word of the day.
That word is a mouthful. Glossolalia.
That's how you start. We're bad people, Preston.
This just reminded me of the word ibophobia. It's a palindrome. It's phobia with phobia spelled backwards on the front of it.
And what is the phobia of it?
It is the irrational fear of palindromes.
You know what? Phobias are terrible.
Some people who name them are just
They're
dicks.
Yeah. There's a few of them that are just ridiculous.
Triskaidekaphobia is kind of cool. It's the fear of the number 13.
Oh.
But it sounds way cooler than it is. It makes it sound like it's a legitimate thing to be properly afraid of. And if you're actually afraid of the number 13, you do have some sort of emotional problems that you probably need to see a professional for.
Wow. You're just dropping truth bombs today, Preston. So any final thoughts on prophecy, the prophets? What do our listeners need to know?
Be wary
of false prophets.
Be wary of prophets in general.
Okay.
Because the reality is that 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to prove easily with real investigation that they are false prophets. And I mean, I know that as an atheist, you don't believe that there's any prophets, and that's...
Yeah, I'm good. I'm already guarded against them. My loins are girded.
Right. And that's realistically a pretty safe position to stand in, for speaking for your own safety. Like, you're not going to be brought in by any crazy folks that are looking to take advantage of you with their prophecies. So I think it's interesting to look at the things that people have prophesied. It's in my religious tradition, there's no hard, fast rule that says nobody outside of our faith can receive prophecy. And for some people, that's not the way they see it. Mm-hmm. And that's fine, I guess. But prophecy in general is a tricky thing.
What? Something tricky in religion? Say it ain't so.
But if you're going to predict anything, that can be problematic. But prophecy can also be simply directing immediate action. And usually that's kind of the purpose when you see oracles or augurs or witch doctors in a royal court, that they're there to give that guidance and read omens. And the reading omens bit sounds awfully tricky. It's interesting that in Judaism, divination is actually forbidden. You can't be casting bones and reading them, or
Well, throughout the
reading tarot
Abrahamic
cards.
religions, that's
Yeah.
super frowned upon. We're going to
Yeah.
cover that
Yeah.
closer to Halloween. We have a whole spooky lineup for you.
It'll be some good fun.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that the way they deal with prophecy is deliberately don't rely on these physical objects that obviously are thrown by chance, and communicate with what feels right in most cases. Receiving dreams is common enough within the Hebrew tradition, a lot more with northern Israel than southern Judah, which I think is a kind of a weird distinction that ended up being a thing that we noticed. And guiding present action based on what you see the need is makes an awful lot of sense, whether that did in fact come from a god or not. That kind of prophecy tends to be a lot more productive. But yeah, if somebody's trying to tell you, hey, you need to buy...
No, you need to sell all your stuff and join me.
Sell all your stuff and give all of your money to this thing that isn't going to do you any good because the end of the world is coming. That is a scam 100% of the time. Prophecy is, I don't know, I think it's cool, but like to look into it and study and see what things people have prophesied, I think it's nifty, but it's not a thing that you need to be stressing out about. Like if you go through your day-to-day life worried about a prophecy you heard, don't.
Unless you're Harry Potter in the 7th book of the series, you don't need to worry about it.
Sure. But since none of our listeners are the fictional character Harry Potter.
I was going to say, Harry Potter, if you're listening, please join our Discord.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I like it. Is that about it for our subject of prophecy?
I think so. So we gotta do some sales now.
Yeah, we do. We would love to have you help support our podcast, keep it going for years to come. Patreon will help us make that possible. And we've also got our merch store. Where's our merch store?
Our merch store is Spreadshirt. We have you can just search for Holy Watermelon, and you can find all of those links and even better conversations on our Discord. All of those links will be in the description box. So we hope to see you on our Discord to continue this conversation.
Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.